Hello and welcome to Crossing Bridges. Ladies and gentlemen, my guest today is our outstanding Pasadena Chief of Police, Philip Sanchez. In my opinion, and many other in our city, it truly has been a blessing to have Chief Sanchez as our chief. He's been one of the best chiefs we ever had, not only from the standpoint of he's a true human being, in addition of being our chief, but more importantly, he's very concerned about providing safety and protection for every citizen in our city. Today, you will learn more about Chief Sanchez's program and what are the things we need to do as to work with his officers to make the city a safer and better for all of us. At this time, it's my pleasure to welcome Chief Sanchez to the show. Chief, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Nat, thanks for having me today.
It's a pleasure to have you.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. What a great opportunity.
Thank you, sir. In our country, the past couple of years, there have been a lot of turmoil, a lot of ups and downs in their action between law enforcement officers and citizens of various states. And the media, in my point of view, has really made it bigger than what it is. And for their own ratings, for their own point of view, they expanded beyond what is the truth about what it requires for citizens of every city and the law enforcement to get together and work in a harmonious way. Because it doesn't just take one side, it takes two sides. Otherwise, you would need an officer in every household throughout the United States to perhaps make it safe. Now, today I want to talk about some of the wonderful programs that you have initiated, and then talk about the safety, the laws and rules that pertains to the citizens as well as the officers, and what is it needed for the citizens especially to know when they're stopped for traffic violation or any other manner, and how they need to interact with law enforcement officers. So if you'd be so kind, let's begin about some of the wonderful programs you have initiated for our community.
Absolutely, Nat. Thank you again for the opportunity to talk with you and ultimately with your viewers through the wonderful discovery of technology. So I appreciate that opportunity. The Pasadena Police Department is a comprehensive, forward-thinking, very progressive organization. We are frankly in the top 1% of the nation. I do believe that in my heart. We have well-versed, very talented officers. Just to give you a snapshot, we have 383 employees. That's police officers, that's police clerks, that's the whole organization. And more than 200 of my officers have advanced degrees, something higher than a high school degree, either an AA, a BA, a master's, a PhD, or a JD. Why is that important? It's important because one of the common themes in our organization is cognitive processing. Be able to think your way out of the problem, not a robotic response that everything is just the same. Problems are unique. They're as unique as the individuals that call and ask for our assistance. In that theme, however, the creativity of the Pasadena Police Department is extraordinary. In the last couple of years, we have created, for example, Pasadena de Español. That is a citizens academy, for a lack of better terms, an informative academy, 7 weeks academy, where we bring in Spanish-speaking community members, and without the use of an interpreter, we speak in Spanish to our community members so that they understand the opportunities, the resources, and the law as it relates to encounters with the Pasadena Police Department. Of course, we've had long-standing programs like PAL and Youth Explorers program as well. I have more than 40 young people that belong to the Youth Explorer program, Nat, and they're all, the vast majority are minority men and women. So why is that program important? I'm not looking necessarily to grow police officers, for a lack of better terms. What I'm trying to do is give the skill set to our young people so that they have the understanding of discipline, they have the understanding of academic support, they have the access to computers and to technology that they might not have those resources in their own home. So as they get exposed to police culture and they get exposed to the police orientation, it helps us recognize what are the contemporary things that our young people need, and in exchange, we're giving our young people the skill sets to be better citizens as they grow up and are future leaders of our organization. And then, of course, you're very familiar with PAL, and PAL is a youth intervention program that really gives us an opportunity to mentor our young people. And you might think, well, Chief, what's the relationship with our young folks in our PAL? Well, under the direction of our PAL director, Officer Anthony Riley, We have extraordinary programs, Nat. It flies under the radar, unfortunately, but we have programs like robotics. We partnered with PCC so that we can bring in young engineering students from that great institution that are helping our young people build robots. Future jobs, Nat, and future skill sets so that our young people are well oriented for whatever the future challenges might bring them. One of the other programs that we engaged in through the partnership with Noble is The Law and You. And that's particularly important, Nat, because I think as our young people start to matriculate through the preteens into the teenage years and they start driving, it's important for them to know their rights under the Constitution so that they can hold officers accountable and so that officers can reasonably hold them accountable as well. So one of the things that's critically important for your viewers to know is that officers can only stop you for a couple of different reasons. One, if they have reasonable suspicion that leads to probable cause. Probable cause in the definition of the law, Nat, is a legal foundation for an officer to make a stop. Consensual stops are also permitted under the law. I might walk up and say, "Good afternoon, Mr. Nadar, can I talk to you for a moment?" And if you say yes, then you've agreed to the consensual contact, and then we can dialogue about whatever the issues might be. If you say no, then I have to go about my business absent probable cause. Now, there are many ways that the officer establishes probable cause. Using your example in a car, it could be a vehicle code violation that establishes the reasonable and legal foundation for the officer to make a contact. Let's use that scenario. Sure. So the officer walks up to the car to some of our young people, and immediately the officer is able to make an assessment about his or her officer's safety, which is paramount, Nat. We know that nationally, in the most recent months, fortunately, we've not seen it in Pasadena, but we've had law enforcement officers assassinated for nothing more than being police officers. We saw that in New York, we saw that in Texas, we've seen it in other states throughout this great union of ours. And so officers have at least a reasonable suspicion about their own personal safety. They should be concerned about that, Nat, because I think the truth is they deserve to go home every night, just like our citizens do.
Absolutely. Let me go back, Chief, on two matters and move forth as to what you're talking about. There's a myth that people want to become law enforcement officers because they are tough, macho, they want to get revenge, they want to have authority, to have a peace and draw and hurt people. But whereas you just mentioned, you have over 200 officers who have MBA, master degrees, PhDs. Now each one of these officers could go somewhere else and most likely get a better job, a safer job, 8 to 5, go back home at night to their families, knowing with God's blessings that when they leave home, they're safe, unless, God forbid, an accident takes place. And during the day, they're relaxed, they're calm. But they have chosen to become law enforcement officers to serve, to protect, because they love it. That's what there's a myth about. But also, most people do not realize, as you and I have talked a lot during our seminars at schools and so forth, and thank you so much for honoring me by coming to schools and talking to the children.
My pleasure, Nat.
That law enforcement officers throughout the United States have the second highest stress than President of the United States. Because most officers, almost perhaps all of them, including yourself, but with respect, you leave home, there's a fear in the back of your mind that, God forbid, something could happen to you that day. And that's with you throughout the day.
Right.
And how do we overcome that is for citizens also to know what you're going through.
Absolutely, Nat. A couple of great points on that, and thank you for raising those observations. The truth is, if you want to be a passing police officer, you have to pass through my office.
Right.
So I interview virtually every applicant to assess their cognitive processing skills, their maturity, their world experience. I ask them questions about adversity. I ask them questions about racial diversity, those kinds of things, because I think that's important in our style of policing here in Pasadena. We're looking for bright problem solvers. It is a myth. Officers don't wake up in the morning and say, well, I want to go to work today and I want to use force, or I want to engage in some kind of lethal encounter or something like that. That's not how police officers work, particularly not here in Pasadena. We have officers that oftentimes do great things that without fanfare or drama, something as simple as helping a lady change a tire on the roadway. That never gets reported, Nat, or something as courageous a few years ago where officers rushed into a home to save a child who was being held at knife point by its father. So those are the kinds of things that officers do on a day-to-day basis, but they are well educated. They could be captains of industries. Absolutely. They could run a small nonprofit. They could go out and do tremendous things each and every day, but they choose to come here, Nat. Sure. And they choose to come here for a number of reasons. Despite, I think, some of the criticisms that oftentimes are warranted of the police department, that our officers are well revered and well respected in Pasadena.
Absolutely.
You know, there are some national trends right now concerning law enforcement and community and the notion of community policing. We've never abandoned that concept. It's not an operational practicality. It is a philosophical oversight of the organization. Community policing is about everything you are, the essence of your passion, your courage, your devotion, your compassion, how you serve the public each and every day, Nat. And it's important that we find the brightest and the best. Our officers, our employees, and our volunteers, Nat, are all professional and they're all dedicated towards serving our community.
Absolutely. Let's go back to the matter when an officer stops an individual for traffic violation or any other violation. If you'd be so kind, I'd like the public and the viewing audience to know, what is the penal code rights of an officer? That is a law. The rights of the citizen and what that individual needs to do during the stop.
Well, when an officer makes a contact with a motorist, first and foremost, what they're going to look for is any suspicious activity. Let's assume that that's absent. There's no suspicious activity. The officer is going to come up and basically introduce himself. Hello, ma'am. Hello, sir. Usually it's moderately formal. I stopped you because you ran that red light.
Right.
Well, now that's a matter of opinion and judgment. As the motorist, you might believe that light was yellow. I wasn't red. Right. And the officer might believe or perceive that in fact it was the red light that you violated. That's 21-453A of the Penal Code. That is the probable cause for the contact between the officer and the motorist. At that point in time, Nat, the motorist is not free to leave. It is a temporary encounter that the courts recognize that the officer is now discharging his or her duty in the interest of the public to safeguard our roadways in this scenario. So the officer is going to ask for a driver's license, he's going to ask for, or she's going to ask for registration, proof of insurance, and those kinds of things. And the motorist is going to produce those if they have them. The officer might make a decision then to issue a summons, a ticket.
Yes, sir.
Or in Pasadena, Nat, we actually issue written warnings. And there's been plenty of times where Pasadena police officers decide on the totality of the circumstances, I'm just going to give this motorist a written warning. Now, it's still a document. Right. We still fill it out. We still look for those kinds of insurance and license and appropriate paperwork, but it never goes to court because it's a written warning. Right. Now, if the officer decides to write a summons, then he'll typically go back to the radio car, or he or she will start the summons, and then ultimately you have to sign that summons under a promise to appear. Here's where the problem becomes a little complicated from time to time. If the motorist believes so passionately that they did not run that red light in the example that I provided, there might be then a dialogue or argument from the motorist to the officer, and there might be argument or dialogue from the officer as well. My preference is that the officer doesn't engage in that kind of behavior, but from time to time that does occur. Right. Mm-hmm. That's not the time to challenge the officer. The time to challenge the officer in the traffic scenario is that when you go to court, you have an opportunity to tell the commissioner or the judge your side of the story. You can summons the police officer to appear in court as well. He or she will provide that story, their side of the story, and then based on physical evidence and testimony, yes, then the judge or the commissioner will decide whether the officer was correct or whether the motorist was correct. But oftentimes what happens, not oftentimes, but there are times now what happens is the motorist is so passionate about what they believe that they get into an argument with the officer, or they exit the car with the officer, and now they're confronted with one another. Emotions can take over, either for the officer or for the motorist, and then sometimes it can escalate more than what it was intended. The law requires, Nat, that you and other citizens of our country, during that contact with the law enforcement officer, that you are cooperative, that you follow the directions of the officer, even in the worst case scenario, Nat. If you're arrested for a traffic warrant or for some other violation of the law, the time to confront the officer isn't at the interaction.
Right.
The time to confront the officer, if you believe the officer was inappropriate, is to get a hold of my office or get a hold of the Internal Affairs Division at the Pasadena Police Department, and that contact number is 744-4241. Send me an email, send me a letter, indicate some level of dissatisfaction. I have an internal affairs investigation that will investigate the officer, and then we'll render a decision on that officer's conduct. But don't mistake application of the law with misconduct.
Right.
There are times, Nat, that I'll get a call and somebody will say, Chief, I want to complain against the officer. And I say, well, what did the officer do? Well, the officer gave me a ticket for a red light. Okay, but what misconduct did the officer do? Well, there was no misconduct. I just don't want the ticket.
This is the thing that really a lot of people are not aware of, that there are laws, there are rules, regulation, and you cannot arbitrarily say, I'm going to take the law into my hand because I'm stopped. Because the citizen has right, and as you indicated, there's a place for everything as we talk about.
Right.
Don't run, don't fight, don't argue, for example. You got to be polite, respectful, because they can have their right and their day in the right places, in the court, with Chief Sanchez, other chiefs, and so forth. For example, let's talk about this unfortunate incident that took place recently. I visited, was in Minnesota. A 17-year-old young man is driving with his headlight. Now, the city has a law. It's a law. You cannot drive with your headlights on. The officer stopped him, asked him to roll the window down. He would not do that, and say he's stopping him because his headlight was on. And he finally came out of the car. The officer asked him to lie down, which he has the right to. He has a cell phone, and with this ridiculous thing that's taking place in our society today, everyone has a cell phone trying to cover what's going on, for sensational, for whatever you want to call. And the officer asked him, please put that away. And they kicked it away and tried to arrest him. Now, he is wearing
A body camera.
a body camera. Suddenly there's a confrontation, you don't see anything. Next thing you hear some shots. Later on, instantly after that, you see the officer in a hospital, bleeding profusely all over. And what happened is there was a confrontation. The young man gets up, starts fighting, hit him, and the officer shot him. Now, this is what I want people to know. There is the rules regulation for the safety and protection officer. There has to be protection. Now, if that young man had listened, simply listened, followed the rule, with God's blessing, he would be here today.
Well, you know, Nat,
Talk
I
about
can't
that,
speak to that incident exactly. I mean, like you, I've read some of the accounts and followed the story, and I imagine many of our citizens have done that. But your point is well taken. The time for confrontation or disagreement isn't when the officer is giving you orders or directives, even if you believe they're incorrect.
That's my point.
Or unlawful.
That's my point.
My encouragement to our motorists or to our citizens is, for that temporary contact, be observant. Get the officer's name. Ask for a business card. Call for a supervisor. Particularly in Pasadena, let my supervisors give me an opportunity to mitigate that and to investigate that, or to take your complaint right at the scene of the incident. But don't fight the police officer. Don't resist the officer. The law requires that in the totality of the circumstances, that you follow the officer's directives. Now, there are some extraordinary examples in that I wouldn't expect. If the officer said, "Hey, listen, I want you to stand in the middle of the roadway until a car hits you," obviously common sense prevails, Nat. You wouldn't do those kinds of things. But as far as engaging and confronting the officer, I would ask our citizens and our community members in Pasadena not to do that. To know your rights and to know the law. Know that you don't have to present yourself to self-incrimination. Know that you don't have to surrender to unlawful search and seizure. Know that you don't have to surrender to unlawful detention, those kinds of things. Those are all components of the law that are up for interpretation. That's why we have lawyers, defense counsel, civil lawyers, prosecutors, city attorneys, those kinds of things. But don't confront the officer at the time. Follow the officer's rules. And if you believe that you're being mistreated, if you believe it's a false arrest, then we have mechanisms subsequent to the stop for you to pursue.
I believe, as you indicated, Chief, that in our country today, every single day, an officer does something of good, even more than that. You don't hear about it, except if it means something to the media. But when a citizen, God forbid, encounters an officer, gets shot, CNN, every media jumps on it, bring all this expertise on their show to expand on it, which really, to me, there's nothing wrong to cover the story, but they go beyond that. They create more enticement, for example, but they don't talk about the over 157 law enforcement officers who died in the line of duty this past year. As you indicated at last seminar, most people do not even know the name of that officer. They were husbands, they were brothers, they were fathers, they were mothers, they had family, they had children, and they went out that day to do their job. They got shot in the line of duty. And many of them innocently, without even being confrontation, just like the officer in Chicago. Just the officer just was walking, sitting in his car. The media doesn't expand on that. The media doesn't go and camp on the doorstep of the family of the police officer as they do, like they did in Ferguson and so forth, because it's nothing to them. Where do you think the media needs to really kind of mature, become more community-minded rather than rating-minded? That is what's best for that individual newscaster and so forth.
Well, and that's a complex question. I have a lot of respect for our partners in the media, and it's been my experience over the years that oftentimes that they've been helpful when we're searching for a runaway child, or in another emergency situation, or an adult with dementia. We use Nixle, or we use Twitter, or we use contact other broadcast media, and they've been very helpful in that regard. My request is that our media, regardless of the form, they look at a balanced reporting approach. That they ask those kinds of inquisitive questions, not only of me or my officers, but of other individuals as well. That we don't speculate, or that we don't cast judgment. There are, as I indicated earlier, there are these kind of national themes concerning police and community interactions. Now, we've not seen that replicated here in Pasadena, even though we've had tragic situations that have occurred in the most recent years as well. But I think that the media does play a role in regulating the tempo of the relationship between the Pasadena Police Department and our community, or law enforcement in general, and the communities that they serve. And if they are approaching it in a balanced manner, if they're not speculating, if they're allowing the reader or they're allowing the viewer to reach their own conclusion, at least based on the facts provided, then I think that we're in a good place, a good framework for future progress. It's been my experience, Nat, that whether it's been written products or broadcast news, that the vast majority of our partners in the media, social media and otherwise, they are responsible individuals that are trying to produce a product. And I respect that. That's why we have a PIO at the Pasadena Police Department. We have a PIO with the city, folks that are very well adversed in communicating those concerns, either to ask for assistance, or we're looking for a predator, or we're looking for a lost child, or to explain the circumstances as we know them at the time. But balanced reporting and a non-speculative approach to incidents really goes a long way in providing calm. I would add a couple other things, Nat, if I may. Particularly unique here in Pasadena, it's been my experience that our religious leaders, they play a phenomenal role.
They sure do.
In Pasadena. We have more than 125 churches in Pasadena, and we have religious leaders from all religious sects in Pasadena, and they're extraordinary people. I've come to know many, and I've been to church and served, celebrated their services. And I find that our religious leaders are very accessible and outgoing. If I call one of them at 2 in the morning because we have issues or concerns, they have been responsive to those requests. And I would say that that's another avenue also for our citizens. If you feel like there's been misconduct by the Pasadena Police Department, or you want to commend the Pasadena Police Department, but you're not sure how to do that, you can reach out to your religious leader. I have relationships with many of them, and they can circle back around, or I'm happy to meet with you and your religious leader as well, so that you feel a little bit more comfortable. But I have to take a moment and tell you, Nat, that bar none, the Pasadena Police Department, the men and women in this organization are extraordinary men and women. We've talked about their educational level, but separate from that, we have men and women that were professional athletes. We have men and women that are musicians. We have men and women that sing as part of their hobbies. We have botanists and folks that are just extraordinary in every regard, that come from every avenue of our great society. In that regard, Nat, I will tell you, following the tragedy in Ferguson, the Associated Press did kind of a national survey on law enforcement agencies, and I think I can quote them by saying that Pasadena Police Department, Pasadena, California, that we were one of the most diverse workforces in the nation. I take great pride in that, Nat, because our workforce is reflective of the community we serve, reflective of the issues that we have, and reflective of the solutions that exist in the workforce and beyond.
You should be really very proud of yourself and your team. I know you're too modest. I know most of your officers, as you know that. I interact with them all the time. And it's a pleasure, because they are really wonderful people. And we have said that together many times. A young man, a young lady, student in the street, when you see law enforcement officer, wave at them, smile, say hello, say thank you for what you're doing. That's all really they need. But it takes more than one person to bring safety in our city. It takes both the community and us to work together.
Great point. And I would say, just in closing, remember the theme, see something, say something. If you see something suspicious, please call the Pasadena Police Department at 626-744-4241. Let my great officers, my heroic, dedicated, passionate officers, respond to your call and see if we can mitigate and investigate that call for you.
Chief, thank you so much. I wish we had more time, but we're running out of time. God
Thank
bless
you, Nat.
you.
God bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, you know what to do now. It takes two of us, as they say, to tango. And we have a great city, great chief, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart, one of the best law enforcement officers anywhere in the United States. Thank you for tuning in. God bless you, and make sure when next time you see an officer, smile, say hello, and thank you. Have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's been a pleasure to have you with us today.